At issue this week, your political questions.
My question for the At Issue panel is this.
My question for the At Issue panel is...
My question for the At Issue panel is...
This is my question for the At Issue panel.
Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton. Thank you all for sending in all these great questions for the At Issue panel. Not all of you made the cut, but we still appreciate you sending them in. With me tonight for our last panel of 2023, Chantal Hebert, Coyne, Althia Raj. Good to see you all in person. Also, I can't believe it's the end. We're moving into the next year. Not the end of the panel, the end of the year.
It's like, what are you announcing?
That's what I'm telling you. Okay, let's move on. Our first question from Adam in Vancouver.
My question to the At Issue panel is, who is the most honest politician we've seen this past year? And how can we bring truth and honesty back to Canadian politics?
Don't all jump to answer that one.
Okay, so it's my assumption that most of the politicians I cover try to be honest.
Yes, I would agree.
And I do not rate them on the most and the least honest because I have no way to judge that. But I do start from the assumption that most of them are in it for what they believe is the public good.
Yes.
And they try to go about their job as honestly as possible. That does not mean that they don't sometimes skirt the truth with spin, but that has been part and parcel of what's been happening in politics for decades. But I'm not going to do an honesty sweepstake.
No, and I wouldn't either, but I would say there's a difference between spin and misinformation, which is something that we're seeing more of, I think.
Yeah. Maybe one's worse. I'm a little less inclined to let them off the hook.
Of course you are.
Not outright lying, okay, fine. But yeah, Blarney spin, selective use of the facts is part and parcel of the trade. Maybe it's necessary, maybe it was ever thus, but we should always be alert that that's in fact what's going on. The same with advertising. Advertising is always false in some way, shape, or form. I do think, however, that politicians who acquire a reputation for being straighter shooters than the other, they get something in the bank. They get capital in their name that is useful and helpful to you, despite being the right thing to do. Yep. And I wish more of them understood that playing the long game, being the skill player rather than the goon, will advance their careers a lot better than always going for the short-term takedown or the quick, convenient lie.
But all parties have those people.
That's right.
They're not the exception.
No. Althia.
I thought Adam, if I remember his name correctly, his question was really interesting. But we cannot answer it honestly because, well, first of all, I feel like that would be asking me to out my sources. Obviously, like Chantal, I talk to people that I have developed a relationship with that I trust. Yep. And there is a lot of those people on Parliament Hill in all political parties. Yep. But it is also true that I think we've seen a lot of lies coming out of Pierre Poilievre's mouth. We have seen a lot of lies come out of Justin Trudeau's mouth. And I don't know if there's an increase, but I think there is people are more casual, it seems, about lying than they used to be, and they lie without shame. And that also applies to political staffers. And that makes our jobs more difficult, but it also creates this huge distrust where you doubt the validity of the information that is given to you, and you will never trust that person again. Once that is broken, that's broken forever. And so if that MP has a career that lasts 15 years, we will all remember that person lied.
Yep, that's right.
Whether they're lying publicly or they're lying privately.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Unfortunately, a talent for duplicity seems to be a particular requirement to be party leader of any party. The people who are the straight shooters, who I was just praising, don't often get to the top because of that. They're not willing to make the kinds of double deals that the ones who do get there.
Okay. Teresa, Woodstock, New Brunswick.
My question for the At Issue panel is, with Meta continuing to ban Canadian news on their platform, I want to know what you think is the best way that journalists and news organizations can battle the ever-growing fake news landscape.
Okay, who wants to talk about the fake news landscape from Teresa? Yeah?
I think the first thing we could do is not take government money, all due respect to the CBC, but those of us in the print side of things never had before. And among the many reasons I have complaint with it has been an absolute gift to people who want to say, oh, you all media people are all on the take, you're just in Justin Trudeau's pocket, et cetera. Beyond that, model the opposite. Be as truthful, give people reliable information. Now more than ever, people are looking for news sources they can trust, and it really accentuates the premium for providing that to them.
Chantal?
It's hard to come with a different recipe, but like Andrew, I don't believe government intervention makes things better. Possibly because, and that has not happened with Bill C-18, I should say that outright, but I have never covered a prime minister who didn't want to have more leverage with the media. And the more news organizations are dependent on the government, regardless of partisan stripe, the more it's not us that gets the pressure. It happens in boardrooms where people worry about bottom lines, which matter to getting journalists paid, but you're putting yourself at the mercy of people who have an interest in having leverage.
So a few things. I'm not entirely convinced the government doesn't have a role, only because, frankly, I don't know if the media can survive without having, whether it's a journalism labor tax credit, like we've had help for different forms of media forever. Like magazines had a postal subsidy. So there are different ways, I think, of structuring that takes it away from the hand of the government. But I think that's a different conversation. For me, the fake news landscape is not really our job to counter that. Like, I worry that people cannot distinguish on their own what is a real news story and what is a fake news story. And I hope that in school, children are being taught how to distinguish between the two. And I worry about, we're entering this era of artificial intelligence, of deep fakes. Yeah. How do we have trusted sources of news that are funded enough to cover real political stories in a way that we want to see them covered? I don't know, but I don't think that's our responsibility alone as journalists. I think all society as a whole, parents, teachers.
Andrew?
Just to pick up on that point, the problem of disinformation is not just one of the supply, it's the demand. It's that there's a large constituency of people out there who prefer the fantasy to the reality, and that's a much more deep-seated problem for society to deal with.
Okay, let's go to Barry. Thank you for all that. Let's go to Barry Ruger in Nova Scotia.
My question for the at-issue panel is this. Here in Nova Scotia, we've had floods, we've had fires, we've had hurricanes, and everybody around here knows that it's tied to global warming and climate change. Why on earth can't the federal government stand up to the oil companies and actually bring in some serious regulation to lower emissions?
Althia, you want to try that one?
It takes way too long for the government to bring in regulations of all types. It took about 6 years for the clean fuel regulations to get done. This environment minister, when he came in, talked about that being a challenge. There are a few reasons why. I asked Stephen Guilbeault, we have a podcast, and every 2 weeks we have an episode, and in November I sat down with him and I basically asked the same question. And I phrased it as, in COVID, we saw all hands approach. We saw things move very quickly. If you really think climate is a catastrophe, why aren't you treating it as such? And he said, well, one thing, not as many Canadians believe that climate change is a catastrophe as much as people thought COVID was a catastrophe. And that doesn't just mean that people are not necessarily on side, but you don't have provincial governments, municipal governments, business leaders attacking the problem the same way. The other thing, frankly, is the government doesn't want to get sued. It has a duty to consult with provinces, with Indigenous groups, so it does take time. Yeah. Could it take less time? Yes. The other thing is on the question that the man from Nova Scotia just asked. It's not entirely clear that the entire cabinet is on side, so I think that's why we got the policy that we got. So there are a variety of reasons why, but it is true that it has taken a long time.
But you also can't flip a switch. Canada relies on oil and gas for not only to function, but economically. That can't be done as quickly maybe as Barry would like to see it.
But it's not just that. We live in a federation where there are constitutional responsibilities to provinces and to the federal government. Yep. Stephen Guilbeault recently brought in a plan to have a cap on emissions. Mm-hmm. Well, the provinces that aren't buying into that, Alberta, Saskatchewan, at this point in the political cycle, are going to wait out the Liberals they may be more amenable to having that conversation if the Liberals win another election. And that brings me back to a fundamental problem that we have with this debate. It's become a wedge issue.
Yes.
And parties are using it in that fashion. So you never work towards a consensus. Instead of having an opposition party say, elect me because I'm going to do better on climate change, you have a party that says, I'm going to do more or I'm going to do less. Now, I wish that we went down the road that we went with NAFTA. There was a lot of opposition to NAFTA at first. 2 of the main parties were against it. Big provinces opposed it. But eventually, all parties decided to make it work. And it led to the renegotiation of NAFTA under Donald Trump. Until we get there to a consensual basis between the main political forces in this country, we're not going to move forward. We're going to go one step forward, one step back.
Last word to you.
I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question. It seems to me they've singled out the oil and gas industry, which is only one industry among many that is responsible for carbon emissions, albeit an important one. But they've had, the oil and gas cap, the legislation on making it virtually impossible to build pipelines, the legislation on shipping oil by tanker. All of these things, and most of these things, or at least certainly the oil and gas cap itself, is not just corrosive of national unity, it's bad policy. The smart policy, every economist, every analyst looks at this, would say is carbon pricing. The regulatory and subsidy thing costs anywhere from 5 to 16 times as much. And at a time when our economy is growing so slowly as it is and likely to continue to grow, we need to be really focused on achieving our climate goals at the cheapest possible way, and we're not doing that.
Okay, we're going to leave this here. Take a quick break. We'll be back with more of your questions, including this one.
What would the implications of a second Donald Trump presidency be for Canada and more broadly the rules-based international order?
That answer and more at issue coming up. Don't worry that we've already... Hey, welcome back. I'm Rosemary Barton. We're answering some of your political questions to wrap up the year. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia all here with me in person. And now here's a question from Tristan in Unionville, Ontario.
This is my question for the At Issue panel. New Brunswick and Saskatchewan dismantled policies that protect trans and gender diverse youth, Saskatchewan going as far as using the notwithstanding clause. It seems as though anti-LGBTQ2+ rhetoric that has been rising across the country has made its way into our politics. Do you agree? And if so, why is it going unchallenged?
Okay, so this is something I think we talked about through the year because it did come up a couple of times in different provinces. I'm not sure it's going unchallenged, but why do you think it's become an issue? Andrew?
Partly because it's new. I mean, the explosion of interest and concern and controversy around trans issues is relatively new. I'm not sure I would agree that in general LGBTQ, there's an anti mood in the land. If you look at where we've gone on gay and lesbian rights, for example, it's extraordinary. So this is the new thing that some people are worried about. Most people, I think, are pretty well disposed to trans people generally. There are these specific carve-out issues, which is why the people who are trying to exploit this focus on these things about, participation in team sports or notification of parents. Yeah. And I just think it's exploiting people's unease with a thing that they haven't really had to grapple with much until now.
Yeah, well, there are the conservative parties in provinces seem to be making it about parental rights as opposed to the rights of trans people.
Yes, it's the next frontier for the religious right, yes. Which has had few victories in this country. But I am always reminded when I see something new, and the words conservatives, it wasn't that long ago that there was a vote in the House of Commons that the Liberals participated in, under Jean Chrétien, to say that marriage should only be between a man and a woman. So politicians have been playing with their own unease on some of those issues over the years to eventually end up in the mainstream flow. And I think on this issue, we will also end up in a place that will not be with the religious right, the social conservatives, or even the premiers who are making political capital with the issue will believe that that's where they are going. I also know that at least in New Brunswick, it has been a matter of some serious internal divisions within the government, this issue. So it's not as if the issue is clear-cut, everyone on one side, and the majority saying, let's let's intervene in all this. It's more complicated than that.
Althia?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think part of the reason is politicians are exploiting people's fear, mostly fear of the unknown, which is usually the case when it comes to cultural rights, immigrant issues. I think it's popular for some because, good parents can't understand why, if my daughter Jessica wants to be called Jonathan at school, well, I would want to know about that. And so I don't necessarily think it comes from a bad place for so many people who support this. It's just being very uncomfortable with change. And there's been a lot of change, and people are very anxious about a lot of things. And politicians are playing on people's fears by choosing issues that wedge them like this. And they're not thinking about the consequences on the people who are most vulnerable.
Yeah, and perhaps not being honest about the actual issue.
The reason why they're doing it.
That's right. Okay, question from Louis in Dunrobin, Ontario.
My question for the At Issue panel is, what would the implications of a second Donald Trump presidency be for Canada and more broadly the rules-based international order? Thank you.
It's a great question, and Louis looks very Canadian there in Dunrobin, Ontario. This is something that people are thinking about, politicians are thinking about, and perhaps preparing for. Chantal?
The short answer is we don't know, but we don't think that there would be anything good that could come of it. This isn't a government that would be coming to the White House with a change agenda to rethink the international world order. This is more of an administration that would be looking at it and saying, I'm going to just kick it down. I don't really give a damn.
Yeah.
The same is true about the rule of law. It's quite unique in history. I'm not so sure that because it's a unique experiment, we really want to live through it.
It's huge and potentially calamitous. We always, I think, fail to grasp the enormity of Trump, how completely disordered he is as a person in every conceivable way. And so this would not be an administration, even like the last administration, the last Trump administration, where he at least had some people there who were trying to rein him in and constrain him. This administration would be filled with the lowest of the low, the worst, most sycophantic flunkies, the people who are the most radical revolutionaries, including people who are open and advocating dictatorship for America. It would be consumed with trying to get retribution on his enemies, using the Department of Justice to do so, trying to evade the criminal charges that he's facing, using the elements of state to do that. And he's very clearly talked about pulling out of NATO. So at home and abroad, it will consume us all. It will be if he gets in, will be the single biggest issue in the world.
Worse than the first time, it sounds like.
Much worse.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we all agree with that. They are planning. The government is planning, certainly. I think even opposition parties are kind of thinking about what a future might look like. Domestically, well, first of all, it would have a likely impact on our own political parties in Canada, in the framing of Pierre Poilievre by the Liberals and the NDP and even the Bloc. If Mr. Trump wins, I think domestically we will try to get out of the way, basically. But what that means is there is so much of the Canada-US relationship that happens like underneath the political level, but all that might be affected, basically might grind to a halt. We will try not to get Washington's attention. The Trudeau team, the links that they had with Donald Trump in the first administration no longer exist. Those people will no longer be part of Donald Trump's entourage in the White House, as far as we understand it. Then there's obviously the impact on our national defense. I think the conversation in Canada would be that we need to spend more money. And then internationally, what it means for our military alliances. So it would be, as everyone else has said, hugely changing, but it will be changing on a multitude of different fronts.
Okay, stay with us. We'll be right back with one more round of At Issue and a couple more of your questions, too. Welcome back to another round of At Issue. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia, all here for our last panel of the year. A couple more viewer questions to get to. Let's go to Aaron in Victoria.
I'm currently living alone in a one-bedroom apartment, paying $2,100. That being said, I'm lucky enough to be part of the middle class. I muse about the homeless population. So my question for the At Issue panel is what's going to be done today to alleviate some of the pressure for those suffering from the opioid crisis, homelessness, drug addiction, mental health issues, as what we do with the less fortunate is a reflection of our society as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, lots of questions there. I'm going to focus on the housing aspect of it because that is sort of where the conversation has been. Obviously, you can be experiencing homelessness or having trouble renting or paying a lot for rent, as this gentleman is. Do we feel like the government is getting closer to solving this, or that people are seized with this issue in a way that they haven't been?
Seized, certainly.
Yeah.
Closer, I suppose. But let's not kid ourselves. This is not going to be solved overnight, if at all. This is a huge and difficult problem. The CMHC, for example, talks about building 5.3 million houses, but that's not going to happen. And if it did happen, of course, by the way, doesn't get noted is that to restore housing affordability, the price of houses would come down 40 or 50% from where they are now. I'm not sure that homeowners in Canada are ready for that. You're already seeing cities starting to push back, for example, on what was grandly announced as we're going to tie money to the cities to them loosening up zoning regulations. Well, some of them are pushing back. This is not easy, is my thing. There are a lot of interests at play, and at best we can try and improve things at the margin, but there's not going to be a magic bullet fix.
And immigration continues to go up. I mean, they put a pause on where they want it to be.
And even if you had lower levels of immigration at the level of housing starts that we've had in the last 30 years,
still be a mess.
We would still have a problem.
Yeah, Althia.
I agree with everything Andrew said. I think the other thing that's really important to recognize, it's not really, nobody likes to hear this, but it's really not the federal government who can solve this problem overnight or even
not alone,
in 5 or 10 years. No, I mean, housing is a provincial responsibility. Municipalities have a lot to do with deciding where new constructions get built. It is mind-boggling to me that in this country we still have provinces that don't have rent control.
Some of us would say rent control historically has been part of the problem. That's what
rent control has allowed people to live in apartments that they could afford.
It also killed rental housing starts.
Well,
so that if you want more supply, rent control isn't going to do it.
Okay, she only agreed at the beginning, and then I went off the rails.
Yes, Andrew and I don't agree about rent control.
Let's let Chantal.
But I think it's a solution, at least one part of it.
All right.
The question said, what is going to happen today? Nothing's going to happen today. But if the issue is homelessness, all these homes that will be built are not the answer to homelessness. That's basically saying live on the street for 10 years, and when all the house prices crash, it's going to be affordable. So stopgap measures. I think homelessness is more than an affordability issue.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Some of the people who are homeless can't afford to find a place. But a lot of people who are homeless are not actually looking for a place. They have all kinds of other issues. They're mostly in city cores. They're not interested in your World War II prefab somewhere in the distant suburb where they have no car, no access to other people. It's complicated. And I'm not sure that governments, especially the federal government, has the levers to make a big difference, except by sending money to provincial and municipal governments.
Okay, let's do one more here from Andrew in Burnaby.
My question for the At Issue panel is, where does Canada's international reputation stand after receiving attention this year from stories such as the allegations against the Indian government and the honoring of a Nazi war veteran in Parliament?
It's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Althia, you want to start us off?
Well, I think our international reputation has actually been on the decline for years, maybe even you could say decades. So it certainly hasn't helped. I think part of the problem is that this government especially, it's not solely just this government, likes to be seen to be acting as opposed to actually acting. And they get into a lot of trouble when they focus on the announcements and the public posturing and less on the delivery. If you act, you don't need to tell everybody that you're acting because they see that you're acting. But our government seems really focused on just the acting part. So that is my answer to the India stuff. The speaker's decision on that's just a colossal error that shouldn't have happened and hopefully will never happen again.
Andrew?
Yeah, the two things he mentioned I don't think are really the issue. I mean, frankly, I thought the government was right to call India out on it. But, you know, I think the larger problem is, Althia said, is, you know, we've been talking the talk but not walking the walk on a number of issues, on peacekeeping, on our NATO commitments, on defense spending, on climate change, on a whole range of issues. We're good at lecturing others. We're not, as a country, we have not been ponying up as we should be. And in terms of our own national security and defense, there's been gaping holes exposed, of which the India thing was one thing. We're in a very dangerous world right now where a lot of big powers are throwing their weight around, including in our domestic politics and endangering the lives of our citizens. And the institutions that we've developed to try and protect ourselves from that I think are being exposed as being full of holes. And that is, as a further knock-on effect, is getting us a reputation as being an unreliable ally in terms of national security with other countries. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Last word to you, Chantal.
Yes, I don't disagree with any of those points. That being said, there is a tendency, perhaps because Canada is part of all those clubs with big players, to kind of forget that we are a middle power, very middle power. I tend to ask audiences when they ask the same question. So how many of you asked yourselves this morning, what is Norway making of this? And if the answer is none of you, that's probably what Norway is thinking about. What is Canada making of this?
Not to pick on Norway, of course.
No, nice country, but our size. And so, yes, we have, the world has changed. We need to fix things. Our plan B, getting closer to China, our plan C, getting closer to India to get further from China. It's all up in the air. And then there's the Trump thing. But it is hard to change institutions. It's like trying to steer a big, in our case, not steamship, but cruise ship.
Yeah. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Nice to see you here in person. And thanks, everybody, for watching and for your great questions. We'll see you back here in 2024.